This story is titled, My Dad Made Me Move Away from Their Table at His Final Work Celebration because it was only for closest family. But when they told the waiter to give me the $5,000 bill, I disappeared and now they're all calling begging for financial help. Hey Reddit, I've always been the odd one out in my family. While my brother Derek took the traditional college route and landed himself a shiny engineering career, I dropped out after just one semester. Instead of drowning in student debt, I got my CDL and built a business from the cab of a truck. My father never missed an opportunity to call me a disappointment, reminding me at every family gathering how I'd thrown my life away. Last month, they invited me to what they claimed was Dad's retirement dinner at some overpriced steakhouse downtown. For a brief moment, I actually thought maybe they wanted me there for once, that perhaps after all these years, they were finally ready to accept me as part of the family. I couldn't have been more wrong. What followed was one of the most eye-opening nights of my life. And honestly, I need to get this off my chest because the whole situation was absolutely insane. I'm 34 years old now, and I've been on the road for almost 16 years. Those early days were brutal. I started as a company driver making absolutely terrible money, sleeping in truck stops and missing every single holiday with family. Back then, I was pulling in maybe $41,000 a year while dealing with dispatchers who treated drivers like we were nothing more than disposable parts in their machine. The cab of my first assigned truck smelled like 3 decades of accumulated cigarettes and fast food grease, a constant reminder of all the drivers who'd come before me. But even in those difficult early years, I had a plan. I saved every single penny I could, living like a monk in a cramped $550 a month efficiency apartment. The place had cinder block walls and a shower so small I could barely fit my 6'3" frame inside it, but it was cheap and it was mine. Every dollar I didn't spend on rent or basic necessities went straight into my savings account because I knew this was just the beginning of something bigger. Eventually, I scraped together enough money to buy my own rig, a used Kenworth T680 with 820,000 miles on it that I fixed up myself. I spent countless weekends in that truck, learning every bolt and wire, making sure it would be reliable on the road. Then I bought another truck and another. Fast forward to today, and I own a small fleet of 9 trucks, employ 14 drivers plus 4 office staff, and clear substantial money after all expenses, fuel costs, maintenance, and payroll are accounted for. Not bad for a college dropout disappointment, right? But my family never saw it that way. To them, I was still just the screw-up kid brother who couldn't hack it in the real world. My trucking business didn't happen overnight, despite what my family seemed to think. I spent 6 grueling years driving for other companies before I managed to save the $52,000 down payment for my first used rig. During those years, I took night classes in business management at the local community college, studying logistics, accounting, and fleet management. Not that my family bothered to notice or acknowledge this effort. They were too busy celebrating Derek's latest promotion or his kids' soccer achievements. I spent countless hours researching the most profitable routes and market segments. Eventually, I decided to specialize in refrigerated goods, which pay significantly better rates than standard freight, but require more expertise and better equipment maintenance. The investment paid off when I built a solid reputation for on-time deliveries, even in challenging weather conditions or tight scheduling windows. This reliability eventually led to securing contracts with regional distributors who didn't want to deal with the headaches of fleet maintenance and driver management themselves. Throughout this entire journey, my best friend Tyler saw it coming from day one. Back when everyone else was laughing at what they called my truck driver phase, he was the only person who actually understood what I was building. "These assholes don't understand business," he'd say with his typical bluntness. "They think success only comes with a piece of paper hanging on the wall." Tyler runs an auto repair shop across town and has about as much subtlety as a sledgehammer, which is exactly why we've been tight since high school. We played offensive line together back then. He was left guard, I was left tackle. We protected our quarterback like our lives depended on it, developing a mentality that carried over long after graduation. That same protective instinct and teamwork approach became the foundation of how I run my business and choose the people I surround myself with. 3 years ago, I made one of the best decisions of my life when I adopted Rex, a German Shepherd from a local rescue. Some jackass had abandoned him when they moved out of state, leaving this incredible dog without a family. Now Rex is with me almost everywhere. Riding shotgun in my F450, sleeping at the office during long planning sessions, even coming along on shorter delivery runs. Having something around that's actually loyal makes a huge difference when you've dealt with a family like mine. Rex has become the unofficial mascot of my company. My drivers bring him treats when they stop by the office. The ladies in the administrative department spoil him absolutely rotten, and my clients always ask about him when they call. Honestly, he's got better social skills than I do. He also has this incredible sixth sense about people. If Rex doesn't like someone, there's usually a damn good reason for it. I've learned to trust his judgment more than most humans I know. Meanwhile, my brother Derek, who's 41 years old, followed what everyone considered the right path. He got his engineering degree, married Lisa, his college sweetheart, and they have 2 kids together, a boy and a girl who are 9 and 7 years old respectively. From the outside, it looks like the perfect American dream, right? Derek makes around $95,000 working for some corporate firm downtown, and Dad thinks the man absolutely walks on water. But here's what the family doesn't see. Derek lives in a 4,200 square foot house in the suburbs with a crushing $3,100 monthly mortgage payment. He drives a leased BMW X5 that he can barely afford, and he's carrying about $47,000 in credit card debt that he never talks about. I know these details because I've seen his credit card statements when he carelessly left them on the kitchen counter during one of my rare visits to their house. Every single card showed minimum payments across the board. The guy is literally drowning in debt, but keeps up appearances like his life depends on it. Every Christmas, Derek makes this elaborate show of talking about the expensive family vacation they just took, or the new set of golf clubs he bought himself. He loves to mention these purchases loudly enough for everyone to hear, especially when I'm around. But I've seen the reality behind those bragging sessions. The man is living paycheck to paycheck in his McMansion, desperately trying to maintain a lifestyle he fundamentally cannot afford. My parents are quite the pieces of work themselves. Dad is 65 years old and spent his entire career as a middle manager at a manufacturing plant, always complaining bitterly about being passed over for promotion. His favorite phrase, which I've heard roughly 1,000 times, is, "I would have been VP if it weren't for office politics." Yeah, sure. It had absolutely nothing to do with his consistently mediocre performance and his tendency to take credit for other people's work. Mom is 63 and worked part-time at a dental office for most of her career. She spent most of her time there gossiping about the patients and judging people based on their medical conditions or financial situations. Both of my parents have that classic boomer mentality where they genuinely believe they worked harder than anyone else, despite having it significantly easier than any generation since. Dad loves telling stories about how he paid for college by working summer jobs, but he conveniently leaves out that college cost about $600 per semester back then. Mom brags about how they bought their first house when she was 24, but she doesn't mention that it cost 3 times their annual salary, not the 9 to 11 times it costs young people today. Over the years, our relationship went from bad to progressively worse. Every time I visited, which admittedly wasn't very often, Dad would make these passive-aggressive, backhanded comments about my career choice. "I saw one of those big rigs jackknife on the interstate yesterday," he'd casually mention during dinner. I guess that's the kind of thing that happens when they let just anyone get a CDL these days. Or he'd spend 20 minutes talking about Derek's latest promotion right in front of me, then turn and ask if I'd ever considered going back to school to get a real education. What they didn't know, or more accurately, what they chose to completely ignore, was that while Derek was living paycheck to paycheck in his overpriced McMansion, I was quietly building something genuinely substantial. My fleet brings in $2.1 million in gross revenue annually. I've secured solid commercial contracts with 4 major distributors who rely on my company for consistent, reliable service. Beyond the trucking business, I've built a real estate portfolio consisting of 5 rental properties that generate $6,200 in monthly passive income. And I have a 7-figure investment account that continues to grow steadily. My sister-in-law Lisa actually knew about their financial struggles, though. She'd drop hints sometimes about their situation when Derek wasn't within earshot. "Derek had to take a cash advance to pay for Tommy's soccer camp this summer," she mentioned to me once during a family barbecue. Another time she said, "We're thinking about refinancing again to try to consolidate some of our debt." The stress was clearly eating at her, but Derek's pride wouldn't let him admit they were struggling. Here's the thing that really gets me. I've actually bailed them out more than once over the years, and they conveniently forgot about every single instance when it came time to show me some basic respect. When Derek's mortgage was underwater during the housing crisis, I quietly loaned him $18,000 and never mentioned it again. When Dad's precious Cadillac needed a new transmission, I covered the $5,300 repair bill without making a big deal about it. When Mom needed extensive dental work that wasn't covered by their insurance, I handled the $3,700 cost without saying a word. And when Derek's son needed emergency surgery and their insurance had a $6,000 deductible, guess who stepped up to cover it? They conveniently developed amnesia about these moments whenever it came time to respect what I'd actually built with my life. As Tyler told me once while we were watching a football game, that's how families operate. They'll take your help when they need it, but they'll still treat you like garbage the rest of the time. It's the Thompson family special. He wasn't wrong about that assessment. I also have a half-sister named Kelly, who's 28 years old. She's from Dad's brief affair years ago that nearly destroyed my parents' marriage. Mom eventually took Dad back, but she's always treated Kelly like absolute shit because of the circumstances of her birth. Kelly and I actually get along great. She's a talented tattoo artist who never bought into the family's bullshit expectations and social climbing. She's honestly the only family member I keep in regular contact with. For the past 5 years, I'd barely seen any of them except for Kelly. Last Christmas, I sent gifts for Derek's kids, but didn't show up for the family dinner. Kelly came to visit me on the road once or twice when her schedule allowed, and that was about the extent of my family contact. I was simply too busy building my empire to deal with their constant negativity and criticism. Interestingly, my blood pressure actually dropped 18 points after I stopped having regular contact with them, according to my doctor during my annual physical. Then, last month, I got the call that would change everything. Dad was supposedly retiring, and they were planning this exclusive family celebration at the Capitol Grill, which they claimed was the fanciest restaurant in town. The whole thing felt orchestrated from the start. First Mom called, then Derek called, then Mom called again. Each conversation had this weird urgency to it, like they were really pushing hard to make sure I'd be there. Kelly texted me separately saying, "They're being weird about this dinner. I think they're up to something." Looking back, I should have listened to her warning and trusted my instincts. But like an absolute idiot, I thought maybe, just maybe, after 16 years of their constant bullshit and condescension, they actually wanted to patch things up. I still had this small, naive hope, buried somewhere deep down, that they might eventually see me as something other than a complete failure. The night of the dinner, I pulled up to the Capitol Grill in my F450 Platinum. This truck has a 6.7 L Power Stroke diesel engine with 1,050 pound-feet of torque, and I've got a custom flatbed in the back for hauling parts when my business needs require it. The whole setup cost me $91,000 in cash. No financing, no monthly payments, just straight cash because I could afford it. Rex sat in the passenger seat looking at me with that expression he gets when he somehow knows trouble is coming. I told him to stay put and crack the windows so he'd be comfortable. He'd be perfectly fine for a couple of hours. The valet gave my truck a thorough once-over, with a mixture of genuine respect for the vehicle and complete confusion about the guy driving it. He clearly wasn't sure if I was someone important who just happened to dress casually for work, or if I was some contractor who had taken a wrong turn and ended up at the wrong restaurant. I handed him the keys and specifically told him to park it somewhere visible from inside the restaurant. "It's got a security system that gets triggered pretty easily," I lied smoothly. The truth was, I just wanted to be able to see my truck from inside the restaurant. Call it trust issues if you want, but those instincts have served me well throughout my business career. The valet gave me a look like he thought I was probably there to deliver supplies to the kitchen rather than eat in the dining room. Whatever. I've been getting that exact look my entire adult life. Most people automatically assume I'm just some uneducated grunt who moves things from point A to point B for a living. They have no idea that I actually run complex logistics operations, manage a multi-million-dollar business with multiple revenue streams, and make more money in a single month than most of them earn in an entire year. Their ignorance and assumptions aren't my problem to solve. Inside the restaurant, I immediately spotted them at a large table positioned right in the center of the dining room. Dad was holding court as usual, loudly talking about his supposed legacy at the company and making sure everyone within earshot could hear his self-aggrandizing stories. Derek sat right next to him, nodding enthusiastically at everything Dad said, like some kind of dashboard bobblehead. Mom was positioned on Dad's other side, occasionally flashing that completely fake smile she reserves specifically for public appearances when she wants to look like the perfect family matriarch. Lisa looked visibly uncomfortable throughout the whole scene, repeatedly checking her phone and fidgeting with her napkin. I noticed that Derek's kids weren't there, which struck me as odd for what was supposed to be a family celebration. They were probably with a babysitter, which meant this dinner was going to cost them even more money they didn't have. Kelly hadn't arrived yet, which was typical. She's always fashionably late to family events. There was also a couple I didn't recognize sitting at the table. It turned out to be Dad's boss, Robert, and his wife, Patricia, which immediately raised red flags for me. Having Dad's boss at what was supposed to be an intimate family dinner felt weird and orchestrated. Great, so we had an audience for whatever was about to unfold. When Dad saw me approaching the table, he didn't bother to stand up or make any welcoming gesture. He just gave me a curt nod and said, "Well, the prodigal son returns. I thought you might be too busy with your trucks to make it." He started with the condescension right out of the gate, which should have been my cue to turn around and walk straight back out of that restaurant. I went to sit in the empty chair next to Lisa, thinking that would be the most comfortable spot at the table. But Derek quickly spoke up before I could even pull the chair out. "Actually, Marcus, that seat is reserved for Kelly. You can grab a chair from another table if you want to join us. This particular seating arrangement is specifically for immediate family and Dad's guests of honor." I stopped and looked at him for a long moment, letting the full meaning of his words sink in. According to Derek, I wasn't considered immediate family. I was something less than that. Someone who could grab a spare chair and squeeze in wherever there was room. Mom immediately jumped in with some transparent bullshit excuse about how they'd carefully planned the seating arrangements for optimal conversation flow, or some nonsense like that. I glanced around the table and realized that everyone was watching this interaction like it was some kind of test they'd all discussed in advance. Derek had that smug little smirk he'd perfected since we were kids. The same expression he used to wear when he'd gotten me in trouble with our parents. The whole setup felt deliberately designed to put me in my place from the very beginning. I pulled up a chair from a nearby empty table and wedged myself between the wall and the corner of their perfectly arranged table. The server came by looking genuinely confused about the seating arrangement, but he was professional enough not to say anything about the obvious awkwardness. "Just a water for now," I told him, deciding to wait and see how this evening was going to play out before committing to ordering food. That's when I started noticing all the subtle signs that something was seriously off about this whole situation. Dad and Derek kept exchanging these meaningful looks across the table, like they were communicating in some kind of secret code. Mom kept steering the conversation toward topics like how important successful retirement planning is, and how family members need to support each other during major life transitions. Robert and Patricia seemed completely oblivious to any underlying tension. They appeared genuinely happy to be getting a free meal and celebrating with what they thought was a normal, functional family. When Kelly finally arrived, she took one comprehensive look at the seating setup, raised an eyebrow at me, sitting awkwardly off to the side, and immediately understood what was happening. "This feels like a setup," she whispered when she came over to hug me hello. "Yep," I replied quietly. "Let's see how this plays out." She took her designated seat, though I couldn't help but notice that no one had actually saved her a spot until I'd tried to sit there. That was another tell that this whole evening had been carefully orchestrated. Then the ordering process began, and that's when things got really interesting. Dad went first, loudly proclaiming that he'd have the dry-aged ribeye, which cost $178. Derek and Mom immediately followed suit with equally expensive selections from the menu. Derek ordered both the lobster tail add-on and the truffle butter upgrade, while Lisa looked physically pained watching him rack up charges. I could see her silently mouthing something that looked like, "We can't afford this," from across the table. Robert and Patricia ordered the surf and turf combination without hesitation. Mom made a big theatrical show of insisting that everyone absolutely had to get appetizers too, because this was such a special occasion. I quickly did some mental math and realized they were already over $2,200 into this meal, and we hadn't even gotten to drinks, desserts, or the inevitable tax and tip. As the food arrived and the drinks continued flowing throughout the evening, it became increasingly obvious what was actually happening here. Every few minutes, someone would casually drop a comment about my trucking business or ask seemingly innocent questions about whether I was doing okay financially. "Those big rigs must cost a fortune in fuel these days," Derek mentioned at one point while cutting into his overpriced steak. "What are you paying per gallon? Like $5.50? "Around that," I replied simply, not bothering to mention that I had exclusive bulk contracts with 4 different fuel suppliers that kept my costs 24% below retail prices. I also didn't mention the fleet card that gave me an additional 6% kickback on all fuel purchases, or the fact that I'd locked in favorable rates for the next 18 months. Marcus is probably doing better than you think, Kelly interjected, clearly trying to give me some backup. He's actually... But Mom interrupted her quickly before she could finish that thought. Oh, I'm sure he's fine, Mom said with false sweetness. Though it must be challenging living in that tiny apartment on a truck driver's salary. I almost burst out laughing at that comment. I hadn't lived in an apartment for years. I owned a house outright on 6 acres outside the city that I'd bought for $450,000 in cash 3 years ago. But they wouldn't know any of these details about my actual living situation since none of them had ever bothered to visit me. My property has a spacious 4-car garage where I keep my weekend car, a 2024 Corvette Z06 that I bought as a gift to myself after landing a particularly lucrative major contract. The house also features a fully equipped home gym and a workshop where I restore vintage motorcycles as a hobby during my downtime. I'm currently working on a 1979 Harley Shovelhead that's almost completely finished and will be absolutely beautiful when it's done. But sure, Mom, keep assuming I'm struggling in some tiny apartment. As the dessert menus were handed out around the table, Dad leaned back in his chair, clearly visibly drunk from all the wine he'd been consuming throughout the evening. With a dramatic flourish, he announced, "Let's go all out tonight. Order one of everything for the table." The server's eyes practically lit up with dollar signs, and he nodded enthusiastically before scurrying off to put in what was undoubtedly going to be a massive dessert order. That's exactly when Derek turned to me with what he probably thought was a subtle, casual expression and delivered the line that revealed their entire plan. "By the way, Marcus, we all figured that since you missed so many family events over the years, you'd want to handle the bill tonight. Sort of like a makeup gift for Dad's retirement celebration. We already told the server to bring the check directly to you. And there it was, the real reason for this entire invitation. The truth hit me like a freight train. All these years, I'd been wondering if maybe I was the problem, if perhaps I was being too sensitive about their treatment of me. But this moment confirmed absolutely everything I'd suspected about how they really viewed me. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as nothing more than a wallet with legs. 4 hours and countless drinks later, after everyone had stuffed themselves with expensive food and multiple rounds of dessert, the server appeared at our table carrying a black leather folder. Without any hesitation whatsoever, he placed it directly in front of me with a professional smile. "Whenever you're ready, sir," he said politely, clearly having been instructed beforehand about who would be handling the payment. The entire table went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that restaurant. Even Robert and Patricia seemed to suddenly realize that something was seriously off about this whole situation. Dad was staring at me expectantly with one eyebrow raised, like he was daring me to make a scene. Mom had that fake smile plastered on her face, the one she always wears when she's pretending everything is perfectly fine, while chaos unfolds around her. Derek was actually smirking, clearly enjoying what he thought was going to be my moment of humiliation. I picked up the folder casually and opened it to see the damage. $6,347.83. Nearly $6,400 for a single dinner. Just for perspective, that amount of money could have bought me a complete set of Michelin X Multi-Energy Z tires for my entire fleet. That's $6,347, representing what one of my trucks grosses on a good 4-day haul from Atlanta to Chicago. 72 hours of operation, 1,100 miles of wear and tear, fuel costs, driver wages, insurance, and everything else that goes into running a legitimate business. And they had just blown that entire amount on one self-indulgent meal. I closed the folder deliberately and set it down in front of me, saying absolutely nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably as everyone waited for me to pull out my credit card and handle their outrageous bill. You could feel the tension building at the table as seconds ticked by without me making any move toward my wallet. "Well," Dad finally said, breaking the awkward silence, "are you going to take care of that or what?" His tone was demanding and impatient, like I was some kind of servant who was taking too long to complete a simple task. I looked around the table slowly, making eye contact with each person before responding. Did anyone here actually ask if I was willing to pay for dinner tonight? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Derek scoffed dismissively. "Come on, don't be difficult about this. We all know you've got the cash. Those trucks of yours must bring in something decent." His condescending tone made it clear he still thought I was just some blue-collar worker who got lucky. So because I have money, which, by the way, I earned by busting my ass for 16 years in a job that you all constantly look down on, I'm automatically responsible for a $6,300 dinner bill that I never agreed to pay. I kept my voice calm and measured, but I could feel my anger building. Mom leaned forward with that manipulative expression she'd perfected over the years. "Marcus, this is your father's retirement dinner. Don't make a scene in front of Robert and Patricia." She was trying to use social pressure and guilt to force me into compliance. "I'm not making a scene," I replied evenly. "I'm just asking a simple, reasonable question. When exactly did I agree to cover tonight's bill? Because I certainly don't remember that conversation happening." Dad's face was starting to turn red with frustration and embarrassment. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Just pay the damn bill so we can all go home." He was clearly expecting me to cave under the pressure and just hand over my credit card. I picked up the folder again, looked at the total one more time, and then did something that shocked everyone at the table. I said it directly in front of my father with deliberate precision. "No." That single word landed at the table like an atomic bomb. Dad's mouth literally fell open in complete disbelief. He stared at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language. "What did you just say?" he sputtered, his voice rising in both volume and pitch. "I said no. I'm not paying for this," I repeated clearly, making sure everyone could hear exactly what I was saying. Derek jumped in immediately, his voice filled with indignation. "You can't be serious right now. This was the arrangement we all agreed on." He was getting flustered because their carefully planned scheme was falling apart. "An arrangement that none of you bothered to discuss with me beforehand," I pointed out calmly. "You just assumed I would go along with it, like you've always assumed things about me and my life." Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably and tried to defuse the situation. Maybe Patricia and I should contribute our portion of the bill. He was clearly realizing that he and his wife had been unwitting participants in some kind of family manipulation. No, Dad said quickly, waving his hand dismissively. "This isn't about you two. My son is just being unnecessarily difficult about this whole thing." I leaned back in my chair and looked directly at Dad. "I'm not being difficult. I'm setting a boundary. Something I should have done years ago instead of letting you all walk all over me." Kelly was trying to hide a smile behind her hand, clearly enjoying watching me finally stand up to the family's bullshit. Lisa was staring intently at her empty plate, probably wishing she could disappear entirely from this increasingly uncomfortable situation. Mom's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper she always used when she was really angry and trying to maintain her public image. "Marcus James Thompson, you will pay this bill right now, after everything we've done for you over the years." She was pulling out the full name treatment and the guilt trip, her two favorite manipulation tactics. That actually made me laugh, genuinely laugh out loud, which clearly wasn't the reaction she was expecting. "After everything you've done for me? Let's review that list, shall we?" I started counting off on my fingers. "You belittled my career choice for 16 consecutive years. You excluded me from family events and treated me like an outsider. You've never once visited my business or my home to see what I've actually built. Dad, you told your golf buddies that I was between jobs when I was running a $1 million company. None of you except Kelly even know what my company actually does or how successful it's become." Dad started to interrupt, but I held up my hand firmly. "No, I'm not finished yet. You know what successful retirement planning actually looks like? It looks like the diversified investment portfolio I started building when I was 26 years old. It looks like living below your means and consistently investing the difference for the future. It doesn't look like blowing $6,000 on a single dinner and expecting someone else to cover the bill because you never bothered to save properly." I pulled out my wallet, counted out $45 in cash, and dropped it on the table. "That covers my water and a generous tip for the server who's about to deal with this mess." Then I stood up and started walking toward the exit. The entire restaurant seemed to be watching our table at this point, probably wondering what kind of family drama was unfolding in front of them. "Marcus!" Mom called after me desperately, her voice cracking slightly. "You can't just leave us here like this." I turned back one final time to face all of them. Watch me. The expressions on their faces were absolutely priceless, and something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Derek looked like someone had just slapped him across the face. Dad was turning an alarming shade of purple. Mom was doing her shocked Victorian lady routine, pressing her hand to her chest like she was having vapors. Even Robert and Patricia looked stunned by how quickly the evening had deteriorated. As I walked out of that restaurant, I could hear the manager approaching their table behind me. The night was about to get significantly more uncomfortable for all of them. And for the first time in years, that wasn't going to be my problem to solve. I made it halfway to my truck before I heard rapid footsteps rushing up behind me. It was Lisa, Derek's wife, looking absolutely panicked and desperate. "Marcus, please," she said, catching up to me and slightly out of breath. "They really can't cover this bill. Derek's been laid off for 4 months and he hasn't told anyone in the family." That revelation stopped me dead in my tracks. "What?" I asked, turning to face her fully. She nodded miserably, looking like she was about to cry. "The credit cards are completely maxed out. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage payments, and the bank has already started foreclosure proceedings. Your parents aren't in great financial shape either. Your dad's retirement package wasn't what he expected it to be, and they've been struggling more than they let on." I stared at her for a moment, processing this information. "And you thought the solution was to trick me into paying for a $6,300 dinner? It wasn't my idea," she said quickly, holding up her hands defensively. "Derek and your father cooked this whole scheme up together. They figured you wouldn't make a scene in public, especially with Robert and Patricia there as witnesses. They thought the social pressure would force you to just pay the bill and keep quiet about it." "Why didn't Derek just ask me for help directly?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Pride," she said simply, confirming my suspicions. "And your dad convinced him that this manipulation would work better than just being honest about their situation. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. Then I remembered 16 years of constant snide comments, deliberate exclusion, and relentless judgment. I remembered Derek telling our extended family at various gatherings that my trucking business was just a phase I was going through, even after I'd cleared my first $1 million in revenue. I remembered Dad introducing Derek's kids as his grandchildren while referring to me as our younger son, like I was still some irresponsible teenager instead of a grown man running a successful business. "Tell Derek he can call me tomorrow," I finally said after considering the situation. "We can talk about a loan with proper terms and a realistic repayment schedule, but I'm not going back in there, and I'm definitely not paying for that ridiculous dinner they orchestrated." Lisa nodded rapidly, clearly relieved that I wasn't completely cutting them off. "Thank you, Marcus. I know this whole thing was wrong, and I'm sorry you got dragged into it." She hurried back toward the restaurant to deliver the news. I got in my truck and sat there for a minute, watching the scene unfold through the restaurant's large windows. I could see them all arguing intensely at the table. Robert and his wife were pulling out their wallets, clearly contributing whatever they could to help cover the massive bill. The server was hovering nearby looking increasingly concerned, and the manager had joined the conversation. I could only imagine how that discussion was going. "But my son was supposed to pay for this." "Well, he clearly isn't going to, sir. This is absolutely outrageous." "Sir, we still need someone to cover the bill." Rex perked up when I climbed into the driver's seat, his tail wagging slightly against the leather seat. At least someone was genuinely glad to see me tonight. I started the engine and just drove away from the whole mess, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone started blowing up immediately with angry texts demanding that I come back to the restaurant. I turned it off completely and just drove for a while, letting the familiar rhythm of the road calm my nerves. Driving has always been therapeutic for me. There's something about being on the open road that puts everything into perspective. That's why I fell in love with trucking from the very beginning. Even when the pay was terrible and the hours were absolutely brutal, you get uninterrupted time to think and process. What I thought about during that drive was why I had ever expected anything different from them. They had shown me exactly who they were over and over again throughout the years. It was finally time that I believed them and stopped making excuses for their behavior. The next morning, I turned my phone back on to discover 19 missed calls and approximately 32 text messages. Most of them were from various family members, ranging from angry demands that I return to pay the bill, to guilt-laden messages about how I was destroying the family. But there was one message from Robert, Dad's supposed boss, that immediately caught my attention. "Marcus, this is Robert Williams from dinner last night. I managed to get your number from the server before we left. I think we need to talk. There's more going on with your father's retirement situation than you know." That was definitely interesting and unexpected. I called him back immediately, curious about what he might reveal. "Marcus?" "Yes, thank you for calling me back," he answered, sounding completely exhausted. "Look, I feel like I need to clear something up about last night." "I'm listening," I replied. "I'm not actually your father's boss. I'm his financial advisor," Robert continued. Last night wasn't what your father made it out to be to me and my wife. What the hell? I was genuinely confused now. He told me it was a family dinner to celebrate your new business partnership with him. Something about you bringing him on as a consultant for your trucking company and wanting to treat everyone to dinner to celebrate the new venture. I nearly choked on my coffee. That's complete fiction. He's never set foot in my business, and I would never hire him as a consultant for anything. I figured as much after watching what happened last night. Robert sighed heavily. Look, I don't normally discuss my clients' financial situations with anyone, but given what transpired at that restaurant, I think you should know the truth about what's really going on. I'm all ears, I said, settling in for what I suspected was going to be a very revealing conversation. That dinner last night wasn't actually a retirement celebration. Your father isn't retiring voluntarily. He was fired 4 months ago for misappropriating company funds. The company gave him a choice: face criminal charges and potential jail time, or quietly resign with no benefits and no references. My mind was absolutely reeling from this information. And the dinner? Your father and brother planned the whole thing together, Robert explained. They told me and my wife that you were wealthy and wanted to treat everyone to an expensive dinner to celebrate a new business venture. We had no idea they expected you to pay for everything until the situation became awkward and uncomfortable. So they lied to you to get you there, then tried to stick me with the bill without any warning, I summarized. Classy move on their part. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. There's more that you should probably know. Your father has been making some extremely questionable financial decisions for years now. He's essentially broke at this point. The house has a second mortgage that's underwater, his 401k account has been completely depleted, and he's carrying significant credit card debt with interest rates that are crippling him. He's been telling everyone that he's financially fine, but the reality is that he's in serious trouble and has been for quite some time. After thanking Robert for his honesty and transparency about the situation, I hung up and immediately called Kelly. I needed to know how much she actually knew about what was going on with our family's finances. Did you know Dad got fired? I asked directly when she picked up the phone. What? No, I thought he was retiring. She sounded genuinely shocked by this revelation. That explains why he and Mom have been selling stuff on Facebook Marketplace for the past few months, though. What kind of stuff are they selling? I asked, curious about the extent of their financial problems. Mom's jewelry collection, the riding lawnmower, Dad's precious golf clubs that he's always bragging about. I thought they were just downsizing for retirement, but now it makes sense that they were trying to raise cash. The more I investigated, the worse the situation became. Derek hadn't just been laid off like Lisa had told me. He'd actually been fired for fudging expense reports, which was essentially fraud. Dad had already blown through his entire 401k account, spending it on God knows what instead of saving it for retirement. Mom had apparently been telling people around town that I had promised to take care of them financially in their golden years, which was pure fiction since I'd never made any such commitment. They had been living far beyond their means for years, apparently assuming that they could eventually guilt me into bailing them out when their financial house of cards inevitably collapsed. The dinner at the Capitol Grill was just their first official attempt to tap into what they saw as the Bank of Marcus. I called Tyler that afternoon and filled him in on all the details while I was throwing a tennis ball for Rex in my backyard. My dog was loving the attention and exercise, completely oblivious to the family drama that was unfolding. "You've got to be freaking kidding me," Tyler said when I finished explaining everything. "So let me get this straight. They treat you like absolute shit for 16 years, constantly belittle your career and your success, and then expect you to cover their asses when their financial house of cards finally collapses." "That's exactly what happened," I confirmed. "Classic Thompson family bullshit," he said, and I could hear him shaking his head over the phone. Tyler has been my reality check since high school, and he's never been wrong about reading people or situations. When I was considering buying my first truck years ago, he sat me down with a calculator and worked through all the numbers with me to make sure I understood the real costs and potential profits. When I was thinking about hiring my first employee, he helped me figure out the true cost beyond just the salary, things like insurance, workers' compensation, and payroll taxes. And when I briefly dated that crazy woman who ended up keying my car after just 4 weeks, Tyler was the one who told me, "I warned you she was nuts, but you had to learn the hard way." So when Tyler had predicted years ago that my family would eventually come crawling back with their hands out, expecting me to solve their financial problems, I knew it was just a matter of time before his prediction came true. 4 days after the complete disaster at the Capitol Grill, I received a text message from Dad that perfectly encapsulated his entitled attitude. We need to talk. Family meeting at our house tomorrow at 6 p.m. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened at the restaurant, no recognition that they had tried to manipulate and use me. Just a simple demand for my presence, like I was still a child who could be ordered around at will. I showed up at their house right on time, pulling into their driveway in my truck. Rex sat alert in the passenger seat, and I decided to leave him in the truck again. Partly because Mom claims to be allergic to dogs, but mostly because I wanted a quick escape option if things went south as quickly as I expected them to. The house looked the same as always from the outside, but I noticed some telling details that confirmed what Robert had told me. The lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks, which was completely unlike my father, who normally obsessed over having the perfect suburban yard. Dad's precious Cadillac was conspicuously missing from the driveway, probably sold to help cover their mounting expenses. Inside, they were all waiting for me like some kind of intervention committee. Mom, Dad, Derek, Lisa, and surprisingly, Kelly were all assembled in the living room. They looked absolutely terrible, stressed, exhausted, and defeated. "Have a seat, son," Dad said, gesturing toward the couch in a tone that suggested he thought he was still in control of this situation. I remained standing, crossing my arms. "I'd rather hear what this is about first." Dad cleared his throat dramatically. "We've hit a rough patch financially. I'm sure you figured that out by now after your conversation with Robert. The company, well, there was a misunderstanding about some funds, and they decided to part ways with me," he continued, trying to spin his termination in the most favorable light possible. "You mean you got fired for stealing?" I said flatly, cutting through his euphemistic bullshit. His face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "It wasn't stealing. It was an unauthorized loan that I was planning to pay back eventually." "You were taking company money without permission for personal use," I replied. "That's literally the textbook definition of stealing, Dad." "You don't understand the pressure I was under," he snapped defensively. "We had appearances to maintain, bills to pay, and your mother's medical expenses." "And Derek?" I asked, turning my attention to my brother. Derek looked up briefly before staring back down at his hands. "Creative accounting. They didn't appreciate my innovative methods." "Creative accounting," I repeated slowly. "So fraud." Derek didn't bother to deny it, just continued looking down at his hands like a scolded child. "So now what?" I asked, even though I already knew exactly where this conversation was headed. Mom jumped in with her practice manipulation tactics. "We thought that as family we could help each other out during this difficult time, just until things stabilize and we get back on our feet." "The dinner was a test," Dad admitted, finally being honest about their scheme. "We needed to see if you'd step up when the family needed you." I actually laughed at the audacity of that statement. A test that I apparently failed spectacularly. "This isn't a joke, Marcus," Mom snapped, her voice rising. "We're about to lose the house. Derek's family might have to move in with us. We need help, and we need it now." I looked around at all of them, taking in their desperate expressions. "Let me get this straight. You've spent my entire adult life looking down on me for being a truck driver. You've mocked my career choice, excluded me from family events, and treated me like I was nothing more than an embarrassment. Now that you've completely screwed up your own lives through poor decisions and illegal activities, you expect me to swoop in and fix everything? You're doing well financially," Dad argued. "Those trucks must be worth something substantial." "They are worth quite a bit, actually. I've built a very successful business despite all of you, not because of any support from you." Kelly spoke up from across the room. "Marcus, they asked me to talk to you too. I told them they were completely crazy, but they wouldn't listen to reason." I turned to her with a reassuring expression. "It's okay, Kelly. This isn't on you, and I don't hold you responsible for their schemes." Then I addressed the rest of them with the decision I'd already made. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm not giving you money to maintain the lifestyle you think you deserve, or to cover up the consequences of your poor financial decisions." The room went silent as they processed what I was saying. "What I will do is offer Derek a job," I continued. Derek's head snapped up immediately. "A job doing what?" he asked, though I could see the dread in his eyes because he already suspected what I was going to say. "Driving one of my trucks." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that living room. "You want me to be a truck driver?" Derek finally said, with obvious disgust evident in his voice. "Yes, starting salary is $78,000 plus full benefits. Complete health insurance coverage, a $55,000 life insurance policy, and a 401k plan with 4% company matching." It's honest work, Derek. The kind of work you've been looking down on for years. I could literally see him doing the mental calculations in his head. $78,000 wasn't the $95,000 he used to make before getting fired for fraud, but it was significantly better than unemployment and the foreclosure proceedings that were hanging over his head. The problem was that it would mean working for his younger brother, doing the exact job he'd mocked and belittled for over a decade. Dad stood up, his face turning red with indignation. This is your idea of helping? Humiliating your brother? No, this is my idea of teaching him some humility, I replied calmly. Something this entire family could use a lot more of. Mom started crying at this point, putting on her dramatic performance. After everything we've done for you over the years? That's the second time you've said that, I noted. And I'm still waiting to hear what exactly you think you've done for me, besides make me feel like shit for most of my adult life. No one had an answer to that question because they all knew the truth. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper that I'd prepared beforehand. By the way, I paid off your dinner bill at the Capitol Grill. Their faces lit up momentarily with relief, but I wasn't finished. I filed it as a loan with my company's attorney, I continued, watching their expressions change. I handed the document to Dad. Those are the repayment terms. $6,347 plus 9% annual interest, due in full within 30 months. You can make monthly payments, or Derek can work it off at $275 per payment deducted from his salary. Dad's hands were visibly shaking as he read through the legal document. This is a joke. You can't be serious about this. It's a legally binding loan agreement, I replied. My attorney has already filed the paperwork with the appropriate authorities. You can't be serious, Derek said, looking like he wanted to punch something. I'm completely serious about this. You wanted access to my money, and that's fine. But you're not getting it for free, and you're definitely not getting it through manipulation and lies. Lisa looked like she might faint from the stress of the situation. Derek looked like he was barely controlling his anger. Dad was turning an alarming shade of purple. Mom stood up dramatically, putting her hand to her forehead like she was in a Victorian melodrama. I can't believe I raised such a heartless son, she declared. You raised a son who learned to look out for himself because nobody else in this family would, I corrected her. And you raised someone who learned the value of actual hard work instead of shortcuts, schemes, and illegal activities. I turned to leave, then stopped and looked back one final time. Derek, the job offer stands. It's honest work that pays well if you're man enough to take it. Call me when you make your decision. And what if we don't pay back the loan? Dad called after me, his voice filled with desperation and anger. I turned back to face him one last time. Then I'll take your house. It's listed as collateral in paragraph 4 of the agreement. It wasn't actually true, and any competent lawyer would have thrown out that agreement in seconds since I drafted it myself without proper legal procedures. But watching the blood drain completely from his face was absolutely worth the bluff. Outside, Kelly followed me to my truck. That was absolutely brutal, she said, but she was smiling as she said it. They had it coming, I replied simply. Oh, absolutely they did, she agreed. So what now? Do you think Derek will actually take the job? Not a chance in hell, I replied without hesitation. His pride won't let him do it, but he's not going to find anything else that pays as well, especially with a firing for accounting fraud on his employment record. Rex was watching us through the truck window, his head tilted curiously at our conversation. Kelly laughed when she saw him. At least you've got one loyal family member. The next day, I went back to my regular work routine like nothing had happened. I had 4 contract bids that needed reviewing, a maintenance schedule that required approval, and a potential new driver to interview. Life goes on, and my business doesn't stop running because of family drama. 3 weeks later, Derek proved me completely wrong. He showed up at my office looking like absolute hell unshaven, wearing wrinkled clothes and clearly desperate. I'll take the job, he said without meeting my eyes. I studied him for a long moment. Part of me wanted to gloat and rub his face in the fact that he was now coming to me for help. But that's not how I run my business or treat my employees. Good, I replied simply. You start Monday at 5 a.m. sharp. I've never driven anything bigger than my BMW, he admitted, sounding defeated. We'll put you through proper training. You'll need to get your CDL first, which will take a few weeks, but we'll get you there. My company will cover the cost of the training and testing. He was clearly relieved and actually thanked me, probably for the first time in his entire life. After he left my office, I immediately called Tyler to share the surprising news. You're not going to believe this. Derek actually took the job. Holy shit, Tyler said, and I could hear the amazement in his voice. Hell must be freezing over right about now. We'll see how long he actually lasts, I replied. My bet is he'll quit within a month once he realizes how much actual work is involved. Want to put money on it? Tyler asked. My bet is 4 weeks maximum. Make it $125, I said, feeling confident about the wager. You're on. Dad and Mom eventually had no choice but to sell their house and move into a small apartment across town. They still tell anyone who will listen that I'm the villain who refused to help them in their time of need. That's perfectly fine by me at this point. I learned long ago that you can't control what other people think of you, and their opinions don't pay my bills or run my business. The loan agreement that I'd threatened them with? I never actually filed it or tried to enforce it. That wasn't really the point of the exercise. The point was showing them that they couldn't manipulate me anymore, and that there would be consequences for their actions. Derek lasted exactly 4 months as a driver before quitting, which meant I won the bet with Tyler by a comfortable margin. Those 4 months actually changed Derek significantly, though. He gained a genuine respect for what I do and the complexities involved in running a trucking operation. The work was harder than he'd expected. The hours were demanding, and dealing with difficult customers and tight delivery schedules gave him a whole new appreciation for the logistics industry. After he quit driving for me, Derek managed to find an entry-level engineering position at a smaller firm. He's making about half of what he used to earn before getting fired for fraud, but it's honest work, and he's grateful to have it. Lisa actually thanked me for giving him the opportunity and told me that the experience changed him fundamentally. He's different now, she said during a chance encounter at the grocery store. More humble, more appreciative of what he has. Derek and I aren't close by any means, but we're civil now, which is more than we've been in years. He occasionally brings his kids over to my house to swim in my pool and play with Rex. His son thinks his Uncle Marcus's trucks are the coolest things he's ever seen, and he's constantly asking questions about how the engines work and what it's like to drive such massive vehicles. Maybe someday when he's older, I'll teach him how to drive one properly. Kelly moved into my guest house for a while when her lease expired, and I helped her get a small business loan to open her own tattoo shop. She's doing absolutely fantastic, booked solid 4 months out with a growing reputation for custom mechanical designs, including some beautiful work she's done on my arms. She paid back the entire business loan a full year early, which impressed the hell out of both me and the bank. Mom still doesn't talk to me much, maintaining her position that I'm the heartless son who abandoned the family in their time of need. Dad tries to reach out occasionally, usually when he needs something or when he's had too much to drink and gets sentimental. I keep both of them at arm's length now, maintaining polite but distant relationships. I'm done being their emotional punching bag or their backup financial plan. As for me, my business continues to thrive and expand. I added 3 more trucks to my fleet last month, bringing the total to 12 vehicles. I signed a major annual contract with a national retail chain that's going to significantly increase our revenue stream. I also bought another rental property that will add $2,100 to my monthly passive income, bringing my total rental income to over $8,000 per month. Business is absolutely booming, and I'm considering expanding into specialized freight like medical equipment transport, which pays premium rates and has less competition. The success feels even sweeter knowing that I built it all despite my family's constant negativity and lack of support. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd caved that night at the Capitol Grill. If I'd just paid the bill and let them continue treating me like a failure who somehow had money, but no respect. It would have never ended. One bill would have led to another, then mortgage payments, credit card bailouts, and loans that would never be repaid. I would have become their personal ATM while still being treated like the family disappointment. Instead, I held my ground and set clear boundaries. I made them face the reality of their poor decisions instead of enabling their irresponsible behavior. The dinner bill was just the beginning. It was really about establishing that I wouldn't be manipulated or taken advantage of anymore. Tyler still gives me shit about the whole situation, calling it the most expensive family therapy session in history. Rex still rides shotgun with me everywhere I go, serving as my loyal companion and unofficial business mascot. And I still don't get invited to most family gatherings, which honestly is the best damn thing that ever happened to me. I've learned that you can't change other people, but you can definitely change how you respond to them. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary for your own mental health and self-respect. My family showed me who they really were, and I finally believed them and acted accordingly.